Bonjour, je m'appelle Jean Dupré.
Buenos días. Yo soy Luis Fernández.
Guten Tag, ich bin Heiner Bergmann.
Good day. I am Kay Savetz. This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Gabriel Baum worked at Thorn EMI, where he managed the project to create two early language learning programs that were published by Atari, Conversational French and Conversational Spanish. Atari's language learning series would also include Conversational German. Gabriel started that but left Thorn EMI before the project was finished, and also Conversational Italian. After Thorn EMI, Gabriel moved to Mattel, where he became one of the Blue Sky Rangers creating Intellivision games. If you'd like to hear more about that, Paul Nurminen interviewed him about that time in episode 37 of the Intellivisionaries podcast. For a deep dive into the Atari Conversational French software, listen to Season 5, Episode 1 of the Inverse Itasci podcast. You can download the software and audio for all of the conversational language series from Atari Wiki. This interview took place on March 31st, 2020. In it, Gabriel misremembers a bit of the technical capabilities of the Atari cassette drive, which was a lot less sophisticated than he recalls. If you'd like to read the technical details of how the Atari 410 and 1010 program recorders worked, check out Appendix C of Day Ray Atari. Links to all of those resources are in the show notes at ataripodcast.com.
I worked for Thorn EMI. Basically a large conglomerate British company.
Sure.
And I was in the IT division, maintaining, from a software perspective, very large, what we call then mainframe computers. Though when I say very large, probably they had the same processing power as my iPhone, but at the time they were very, very significant. And I personally was getting more and more interested in personal computers that were appearing. We're talking about, I started work there, I think it was in 1976. And so while I had my day job, at the same time I had bought myself an Apple II, and I'd done some programming on, I think it was an Altair. Anyway, a couple of other personal computers, and I really enjoyed it. It was new, and I liked the programming side a lot. Mm-hmm. So at some stage, it wasn't me, but another executive at Thorn EMI got permission to set up a division just dedicated to developing applications for a swath, theoretically, of personal computers.
So what were you doing at Thorn EMI before? What were you doing with the mainframes, or just what was your job?
I was in charge of the software maintenance group. Mm-hmm. I'd been a programmer. By then, I'd probably been a programmer for about, let me think, easily 10 or 12 years, mm-hmm. purely programming. But I was brought in there to manage the group that was doing software maintenance on these large computers. Mm-hmm. So
supporting the music publishing business?
Among other things, it
mm-hmm.
was one of the earliest real-time systems, and certainly there were terminals in the publishing divisions of EMI. But again, as I say, I enjoyed my job, and yet I was getting more and more interested in having a small computer by my side, mm-hmm. and being able to program. I was, basically I was a machine language programmer, and with a fair amount of background in COBOL, which was particularly boring, and Fortran. And, I've always felt, even, it's lived with me all my life, that in a funny way, programming is an end in itself, that it does a little like learning a language, a national language. It does something to the brain that's good for logic development. It's good from a creative side. I've always felt that programming is good for you. So, as I say, as soon as I found out that someone was forming a group to write applications for personal computers, I asked him if he needed someone to program and to manage any programmers that were brought on board. And he took me up with a fair amount of enthusiasm. And so we set up a division of Thorn EMI in, funnily enough, in Soho, which is an unusual part of London, not usually associated with technology, at least not at the time. More like clubs and music and artists, but nevertheless, it was a good place to work. And we started looking for potential, I'll call them clients, basically companies that were developing personal computers that would like applications. Mm-hmm. And basically, there were only 3 games in, no pun intended, there were only 3 games in time. At the time, I mean. There was Apple, clearly, with the Apple II. There was the Atari 400 and 800 that were, I believe, already out. Yes, I'm sure they were already out.
Sure.
And the as yet unavailable and always to be slightly beyond reach, the Intellivision keyboard component. And basically those were the 3 that we addressed from first from a sales and marketing perspective. We tried to set up the relationships so that we could develop for them. And then from a technical point of view. I think to Atari we pitched immediately expertise in language learning. And the reason for that is, one, to some extent, my background. My parents moved to Spain. I was born in London. My parents moved to Spain when I was about 9. They set up and developed a language school there, so I had lived surrounded by language teaching for quite some time. But also we had developed a business relationship with the publisher, Longmans, a very reputable and large. It's the Longman Group, I believe, was their official title. And they were extremely heavily into educational literature. As far as I know, they had no background on the technical side at all. And we proposed an alliance with Longman to develop language teaching software, which didn't exist at all, for the personal computer. And we pitched that to Atari. The advantage we had then, and we're talking about, let me think, late 70s, and the language teaching schools throughout the 70s had started using, what was then high technology, tape recorders, basically. Because in the early 70s, that was a very new idea that people could learn by listening to their own voice, seeing what they had said and comparing that to what a teacher had said, all that without the presence of a teacher in front of you. Mm-hmm. So by the late 70s, there were a number of, must have been many language schools that were just full of booths where people sat, where students sat, listening to a phrase by a teacher, and then repeating it, and then comparing what the teacher had said and what they had said. Which, to be honest, sounds very, very unsophisticated at the moment, but it was relatively high tech at the time. Mm-hmm. but there was nothing that had been developed for personal computers, and there was chicken and egg syndrome. There weren't many personal computers around. So with this alliance with the Longman Group, we pitched the idea to Atari, and they were pretty enthusiastic about it. They gave us a few Atari we had both 400s and 800s. I don't remember any technical training, because there was one key thing, and I've been thinking about this and remembering ever since you mentioned that you'd like to talk about those times. But I don't remember them giving us any technical training, though it's possible. But we discovered one key element of the both the 400 and the 800, and it was that we could position the cassette recorder at any position we liked, and we could remember a previous position and go back to it. And that was critical, because if you just think about it, if someone says something into a cassette recorder, then it's, you've got to rewind it to be able to play it back. And you have to know to what point you rewind it. For some reason, I remembered very clearly that we were doing all the programming in BASIC, because that was the only language that we had access to.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember distinctly that the instruction was a poke instruction, by which you can you establish what combination. I think it was 8-bit bytes. Anyway, what combination of 8 bits you wanted to place in a particular position in memory, and you could issue the instruction poke, and it would place those 8 bits there. So between that and knowing where the markers were, in other words, we would set up a particular bit combination that said, when rewinding, I want to come to this point. And it worked perfectly. So we would mark the start of the student speech and the end of the student speech, and be able to return to that point at any time.
So I'm going I try not to be in the business of correcting people I interview, but it was so much simpler. It was so much simpler than you're remembering, because the cassettes were not random access at all. They were only serial. You could pause and you could play again. That was it. You were not rewinding.
How do you see it? I'm curious about that, because the teacher, let's say, most simplistically, the teacher would would give a phrase,
right,
and then the student would record his or her own version of the phrase, and then we would have to rewind to the start point of what the student had said, and potentially to the start point of what the teacher had said, so that the student could listen to the teacher again and compare it to his or her recorded voice. Do you see, is that visually or technically in keeping with your view?
The system did not and could not record the student voice. I think they just talked at the screen. If you wanted to have the system repeat the teacher voice, it had to be recorded twice, and it was just played back, maybe with a pause in the middle, but there was no rewinding, and there was no recording.
We'll leave that. Did you say you have a 400 or an 800?
I do
at home now.
I do. I'm not sure if I have any of the conversational packages, but yeah, I still have a computer.
I'm going to look at eBay and we can check this. It's curious, but
like I said, I don't like to argue with technical points, but
Right, and I understand that, and of course we're talking about 40 or 50 years
Sure,
ago.
this is a long
so
time
my
ago.
memory could be faulty. But having said that, I'm going to think of my view as correct until proven otherwise.
Absolutely, sure.
And I'm totally open to being proven otherwise.
So you programmed this in. So you were contracted by Atari to do these?
Yes. And we linked up with the Longman Group, and they had an author, Louis Alexander, who had already probably been at least 15 years in the business of writing language educational books. And he, like many other language teachers, was very interested in getting into the whole idea of language teaching on personal computers. So he threw himself into developing some kind of coursework for it, and we put the first one together. As far as I remember, that was Spanish, followed by French. Once we had done the first one, the rest were relatively easy because it was more a matter of changing the verbal cues.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else was fairly well established, and that was it. I personally supervised Spanish and French and the start of German, but halfway through that, my career took a slightly different turn, and I went and joined Mattel Electronics, and was there during the video game period. So I became a competitor, but
Sure.
But that's how it evolved.
You said you did Spanish and French and some of German, and sounds like you were not involved with Italian, which was the other one.
That is correct.
Okay.
And I was not the implementer.
Mm-hmm.
I supervised the programmers and the developers who were actually doing the work, and that was the extent of it.
How big was the team?
I was trying to remember that, and I would say, I think I'd say it was about 12 people in total, but developing more than one application, and maybe 3 or maybe 4 people working on the language applications.
Did you hire speakers and like record them in a sound booth? How did that work?
No, we didn't hire. That I remember, we didn't hire professional speakers. As far as I remember, Longman provided all the coursework, and by coursework I mean the written side and the verbal side as well. So they did that side of things, and they provided us with the recordings that matched the coursework that they had developed.
Oh, I see. All right. So it was more about adapting existing coursework to work on the computer. I understand now.
Except that the coursework was not existing. Well, it was existing only for this project. So Longman was developing the coursework as we were developing the computer side, the application.
I see. So was the program basically more or less the same from language to language?
Yes, I'd say it was very, very similar, because one of the things I remember is the individual programmer who worked on Spanish and French really objected to moving on to do German because she was really tired of doing the same thing over and over again. I don't blame her.
Sure. Talk to me about the actual process of mastering the tapes and getting the audio in sync with the program. Did you have to deal with that?
I didn't, and I really have no knowledge on the subject. I'm just trying to think. Is that yeah? No, the actual publishing of these programs also came after I had left. I had a slight dispute with Longman to ensure that they wanted just to have the names of Louis Alexander and maybe the implementer on the language side. They wanted those two on the course book, and I was absolutely determined to get Thorn EMI credit. I wanted my name and I wanted the programmer's name in the book. So we had a dispute there, and I won the argument. So if you look at, I'm looking at German, you'll see that the typeface of my description of my role is different from the ones of Louis Alexander and, in this case, Isabel Wiltshaw, who's a lecturer in German, which means that they must have had the everything ready to go. And when when they agreed to put my name in there, they used a slightly different typeface. But what I'm really getting at is that I didn't go beyond that stage, so I know nothing about the mastering of the tapes.
Okay. That's great that you managed to get your name on there.
Yes. Well, and this went on in my career at Mattel. To my mind, programmers, or developers, if you want to, they are the heroes. They're the equal heroes. They are creative people, there are programmers, but they all work together. And giving credit to a programmer for doing a job that gets out to the public was critical to me. That was my first argument, the one with Longman, but it repeated itself over and over again at Mattel as I tried to ensure, which I did in the end, that the programmers would be credited with their work and in due course get some royalties for their work. But it was a tough sell. In the case of getting credit for their work, no one, including me, wanted to put the programmers' names out there because headhunters were just swarming around. On the other hand, I wanted to make sure that programmers got credit. I think that's followed me throughout my career.
Do you remember any other stories or any problems or issues or interesting stories about that project?
It was exciting because we felt we were breaking new ground, not in programming for Atari, but in programming at all, a personal language teaching course. Mm-hmm. But no, it was relatively straightforward project, and no, can't think of much else.
Did this scratch your itch that you were looking to scratch from getting from mainframes to really digging into doing some work on some personal computers?
Yes, absolutely, and I never let up. I mean, I still remember standing. Everyone has these memories now, but it was unusual then. I remember standing at a desk with my then 4-year-old daughter by my side, hitting return or enter whenever I asked her to do that. So from that moment onwards, I always had a personal computer, and it just it never ceased. So I moved my career, my interest from very large mainframe IT systems to what were then very small personal computers. And there were a number of other ones that I experimented with, and I know that I tried setting up an accounting system on the Altair because I had some friends who were lawyers who wanted an accounting system. So yeah, that itch has been scratched continuously from that day on.
Excellent. Do you have any recollection on what Atari paid to have this this project done?
No, I wanted to tell you that if I could dig it out, but I do not remember. I remember dealing with a particular lawyer, but I don't remember much of the contractual side. I do remember. I mean, I was born in London, so and interested in languages, so phrases always interested me. And I remember when I tried to introduce the expression, "We will use our best efforts," the lawyer introduced me to two expressions. One was "Don't be cute, Gabriel," and the other one was "Those are weasel words," referring to the expression, best efforts. He was right on both counts.
Did Thorn think about or embark on any other projects for Atari at that time?
Not at that time. I found out later that there were several games that were published through Thorn EMI.
Sure.
But none that I was involved with at the time. I left to join Mattel in I think it was January the 1st of 1981. So I missed most of the Thorn EMI app development.
Sure.
Straight after, well, I'd say within 4 to 6 months of me taking up the job at Mattel, Ray Kassar of Atari reached out and employed another Thorn EMI person who was working for me, who had been working for me while I was there, and he employed that person, whose name I don't remember, as VP of development at Atari. And then within 3 or 4 months of this person joining Atari, he moved to advanced. There was a big turnover of staff. Well, you know better than I do at Atari. This person was moved to advanced game development. And I'm attempting to remember his name, but I just can't. I was hoping he might come up among the names you listed just then, but no. Sorry.
There were so many managers and programmers at Atari over the years.
I felt it was, I don't know, intellectual competition in that Mattel had hired me, so Atari was absolutely going to do the same thing and hire a British guy, preferably from the same company. It just seemed too much of a coincidence that they'd reach out to exactly the same company to pick up someone to run their development organization.
Mm-hmm. So when you went to Mattel, did you move to California or to the United States?
Yes. I interviewed with Mattel for, the way I saw it, it was day and night for about 3 or 4 days. And, well, I was used to the English system then where you met the hiring manager, you spoke, maybe you met one other person, and you got an offer or you didn't. But this was the different style, which is now absolutely standard, but I met everyone at Mattel. And I mean, this was about, 20 people over 3 days. All the programmers there were only 4 who would later work for me, plus the marketing people, plus the management. So I went through that. And now remind me, what was the original question? What did you just ask?
I was just asking if you moved to the United States at that point.
Yes. Yes, after interviewing endlessly, we moved to the United States on January the 1st, I'm sure it was, 81.
What haven't I asked you about that time at Thorn EMI and working on these projects? What should I have asked you that I haven't?
I think we've covered it fairly thoroughly, and And just knowing that we were going to have this conversation got me digging into just my memories of what happened at the time, and the fact that I could remember this basic poke instruction is that came. I think that was one of these 4:00 in the morning memories that just suddenly come to light. No, I think we've covered everything pretty well.
Did I ask you how long the project took from start to finish?
I would. I'm trying to kind of get a picture in my own mind, but I would guess about 10 weeks per language. And there's a bit of guesswork here. Well, sorry, there's more than a bit. I would stick to that. So 2.5 months per language, I think, was probably it.
Sure. What do you do today?
Well, I spent the rest of my career managing programmers, and basically I enjoy the creative process, building things. So whether it's video games or, quite honestly, whether it's trading systems for options on Wall Street, that's what I enjoyed doing. And by the way, the age group, the mental age group of the clients in both those cases is remarkably similar. But so I did that for a long while, and then my last job, I was working at I was VP at Navteq, the company that does maps for navigation, or did maps for navigation systems. And I retired from that around 2005. And then I went back more as a vocation than anything else to my first love, which is technology and language teaching. So I lectured at the University of Chicago on technology for translators, because there's a lot of technology around that helps translators do their job. And in doing that, I did a fair amount of translating. I speak fluent Spanish. So I did a lot of translating and kept up to date with the technology. But I think I can say it. I finally retired maybe a year and a half ago, though I'm not used to saying that, but I'll admit it. And so now we live, my family and I live in Sonoma. I'm surrounded by grapevines, and because of what's happening around us at the moment, we've got our entire family here, and I don't know quite. I mean, it's a beautiful place to live, and it's enjoyable to have the family here. It's just I'm not saying anything new. The circumstances that are forcing that to happen are not pleasant for anyone.
Sure. No. Agreed. Do you have any thoughts on the current apps that people are using to learn languages? I mean, people are using Duolingo and things like that, which, is basically a 30-year-old later version of conversational, Spanish and French.
Yes, I've never been a fan of computer-aided learning, just because I have no, I hate to say this, but I have no great faith in the results. Teaching is another story. Learning a language with a teacher in front of you, or nowadays with a teacher who may be in the country, the language of which you're learning. That I think is excellent. And this may be my age showing, but the really, in my view, the only way to learn a language really well is to be hungry in the country where you don't speak the language. It's funny how hunger will push you to learn critical vocabulary and critical verbs very, very quickly. So what is known as the immersion method. You're immersed you're in a place where they only speak that language, and you have requirements. It's amazing how quickly the brain adapts and learns the language. But as I say, that could be my age showing.
If you could send a message to the people who are still using Atari computers today, what would you tell them?
That they're looking, that I hope they appreciate the history that they're looking at. I collect, in my idle moments, I collect old calculators. And by old calculators, I mean comptometers, mechanical calculators that you have to physically move to get the results. And I collect them because my career has been in computers, and I look at these devices and I think the ingenuity that went into creating them, and paralleling what I said about language, there was a need. The need had to be satisfied. And so you get devices the house shakes when I operate one or two of them. And on the other hand, I have a handheld mechanical calculator that you just can't believe how sophisticated and small and how well it does the job. I have one of those as well. So there's not much difference. I wish, by the way, I had my original Apple II, because this is history, and not to be corny, but it'll never repeat itself. And so these devices are things to be looked at and smiled at, same as books on your shelf. You keep books on your shelf, not because probably you're going to read them again, but because when you look at them, you remember where you were, what you did, what you were doing at the time you read it. Obviously, music has that trigger and more. And so similarly with inanimate objects that were very, very influential at the time, to have one sitting around is just to look at and to smile and occasionally run your fingers over the keyboard. I just enjoy them. They're a piece of history.
Beautiful. Thank you for your time, Gabriel.
Most welcome, most welcome.
Bonjour,
Bonjour,
je m'appelle Claude Dumas.
je m'appelle Amy Connors.
Enchanté.
Enchantée.
Êtes-vous anglaise?
Non, je ne suis pas anglaise. Je suis américaine. Êtes-vous français?
Oui, je suis français. Je suis de Paris.
Je suis de Saint-Louis.
Saint-Louis, formidable.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Yo soy Juan Cortés.
Yo soy Diana Lake.
Mucho gusto.
Mucho gusto.
¿Usted es inglesa?
No, no soy inglesa. Soy norteamericana. ¿Usted es mexicano?
Sí, soy mexicano. Soy de la Ciudad de México.
Soy de Nueva York.
Nueva York. Muy bien.
Guten Tag.
Guten Tag.
Ich bin Volker Beck.
Ich bin Carrie Squires.
Sehr erfreut.
Ebenfalls.
Sind Sie Engländerin?
Nein, ich bin nicht Engländerin. Ich bin Amerikanerin. Sind Sie Deutsche?
Ja, ich bin Deutscher. Ich bin aus Bonn.
Ich bin aus Chicago.
Chicago. Toll.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.